All right, we are live on the webinar. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I'll just let a couple of seconds go by here so that some of our participants can have an opportunity to log in and be able to hear us. If you're already listening, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome. Really excited to have this conversation. We've been wanting to put something like this together, Roderick and Sean and myself. And really address some of the challenges that we're seeing out there in the market today. So I'll start with a couple of housekeeping items and then move into some introductions, and then we'll just get right into it. So we will be doing a Q&A session towards the end of the session. So do feel free to type in your questions that you'd like Sean or Roderick to address at the end. We will make sure that we make the time to provide you with some insight on those questions, of course. But don't wait until the end. You can just type them in at any point. We'll make sure that we get to them. Okay, so first I'd like to introduce Roderick Jefferson. He's the CEO of Roderick Jefferson and Associates. Roderick is a very, very acknowledged thought leader in the sales enablement space with over 20 years of experience in helping organizations build enablement teams, and he's done so with some of the most globally recognized Fortune 100 companies. He's won a gaggle of awards. I'm going to try to get this right. It might take me some time, but I think it's important that we recognize, what you've been able to accomplish, Roderick, in your time. So Sales Hackers, top 10 sales enablement consultant in 2019, LinkedIn's top 15 sales and marketing influencers in 2019. Selling Powers, leading sales enablement consultant in both 2018 and 2019, and Serious Decisions Sales Onboarding Program of the Year in 2015. I mean, that's incredible right there. And just so you know, prior to founding RJ&A, he also held a variety of executive positions at companies like Marketo and Salesforce.com and NetApp and Siebel and PayPal, and the list goes on. So Roderick, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure.
Andrew, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least is Sean Sykes, CEO here at Peak Sales Recruiting. He also has over 20 years of experience on executive leadership teams and building and running high-performance sales organizations. Most recently, before joining Peak, he was the managing director at Avast for the Americas. They were a leader in digital security solutions, and of course still are. And then prior to that, he was part of the senior leadership team at 2 technology firms that were acquired by publicly traded organizations, as well as led sales and marketing for a custom software development organization that specialized in IoT, cloud, mobile, etc. So Sean, thanks so much for being here with us today also.
Oh, Andrea, please, thrilled to be here and thrilled to be in the presence of Roderick. I feel like I'm sitting on the bench next to Steph Curry.
Hey, you can't have the Splash Brothers without 2 of us, so I feel the very.
Awesome. Well, listen, I think we should, tell our listeners why we wanted to put this webinar together. So, as one of North America's leading sales executive search firms, we work with hundreds of organizations every year that are faced with these 3 challenges. So these are sort of the 3 main challenges that we're noticing they're faced with, which is finding top talent, getting them to produce quickly and consistently, and then retaining them, right? And I know Roderick has articulated this as well in conversations that we've had in the past. It's interesting. This morning, I read a study which was so timely right before this webinar, but there was a study that was done, a really great study of 425 enablement and operations and sales leaders that were asked about their top 4 sales challenges right now. And 52% of them said that recruiting and hiring was one of their top challenges. And then another 40% listed developing sales skills on their team. When they were asked about their top 4 selling priorities in 2019, a whopping 65% of that 425 listed improving productivity of their sellers and their sales teams was going to be one of their top priorities. So based on these numbers, I think that really validates the conversation that we're about to have today. It's clear that these are challenges that folks are facing. So hopefully we can provide some value to the listeners out there today, and maybe they're quite likely facing some of these challenges. So let's get right into it then. So 20 plus years in the space, old dogs, as you guys like to call yourselves.
I'm going with seasoned. Sean Sykes. I like seasoned.
Yes, seasoned, well seasoned. So you've seen a lot of changes over the past 20 years. What are you seeing, in the market right now, Sean? Maybe we can start.
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrea. I think that when I think about sales enablement and productivity, there's two events happening right now that are really highlighting or surfacing this requirement. And the first is, and we're seeing it with our customers out of Europe and Asia, looking to expand in the North American market. And that is just the amount of money right now that is coming into the markets. I think that VC funding last year in 2018 was up 294% over 2017. And so with this growth and with a lot of these sort of Series B type companies looking to deploy capital, or just these mid-market and enterprise companies looking to do build-outs, we're seeing an increase of requirements for multi-hire build-outs. And of course, that's going to create a real requirement around sales enablement. And the other thing that we're seeing in the market, the other characteristic that is really starting to surface the need for enablement, it's the complexity of the market. And whereas in the past, sellers simply had to learn about and be able to position their product features, functions, or ROI effectively, now there's a whole different expectation from the customer base, because there's so much information available to them, and 70 to 80% of the research is already done in advance. And so now you've got this situation where there's an expectation that the seller is not only proficient and able to talk about the product, but in fact, they're actually an expert, and that they're able to add value around their product and services. And I had a conversation this morning with a global hotel chain, and it was interesting because as we started to talk with them about a couple of these senior leadership roles, it became evident that they were looking for some more advice about maybe how the roles are changing, or different ways for them to look at how they could evolve this leadership role. And I think that we're seeing that everywhere. And without effective sales enablement, both of those issues are going to put real pressure on your sales forces.
Yeah, thanks so much. It makes a lot of sense. Roderick, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Sean. I think that the buyer journey has shifted, and that has really put an enormous amount of pressure on the sellers to become more proficient earlier in the sales cycle and to be able to show that value. I think there's another couple of things that are happening also. One, the value of actual sales enablement versus just simply sales training has gone up exponentially. And it wouldn't be right, since you guys are throwing out stats, I should too. So I've got a few things from an individual perspective around having an effective onboarding program. 2.2% more effective when linking sales actions to actual revenue. Imagine that. 83% more productive when you're tied to technology usage along the buyer's journey and the ability to then tie into that buyer's journey. 58% more effective sellers in finding, enabling, and retaining talent. Now that's one that jumps off the page. Now let's look at this from an individual perspective. 24% higher individual quota attainment when you've got an effective onboarding program, 32% higher team quota attainment. And then finally, 23% higher lead conversion going on just simply from having a program in place that is consistent and scalable and repeatable that sets that baseline.
Sean, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the other, well, actually, I guess I do. The only thing I would add, when we talk with our clients, churn is such a competitive advantage. If you can find ways to reduce churn within your force, you're going to have a competitive advantage over your direct competitors. And the average churn right now is somewhere around 30%. But we talk to people regularly who have churns anywhere up to 40 to 45 and even 50% in various roles and at various points in time of an employee's tenure. And so when Roderick and I start to talk about the importance of onboarding, thinking about how you can increase or retain your reps for a longer period has a dramatic effect on, years 2, 3, and beyond as far as achieving those revenue targets. So yeah, there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have another question. You mentioned, high churn organizations that are, going through some of these challenges, right, that I had mentioned earlier. Who are you seeing is affected by this the most, right? What kinds of organizations have we seen, Sean, coming into peak with, some of these challenges that they're looking to address?
Yeah, it's like I mentioned earlier there, with the doubling, almost tripling of that investment, we've got so many Series A companies that are now getting their Series B funding. And I think one of my favorite partners, one of our VCs out of the West Coast, his response always is, hey, we're not giving money to people to make interest. We want them to deploy that capital. And there's an expectation typically to double or triple the size of their forces over the next 18 months. And then we're seeing a lot of these hyper growth companies, organizations that are just growing organically. They're taking advantage of a very, very hot market. They're launching new products. They're launching new services. And again, there tends to be this focus on a multi-hire type scenario where people are hiring 40, 50 people in 30, 60 days or 90 people in 90 days. So those are the kinds of sales transformations we're seeing. So it's everything from a small organization that has experienced some sort of inflection point that's requiring a pivot, or it's the mid-market in the enterprise that's just growing organically at a very fast rate.
Roderick, from your perspective, from the enablement side, where are you seeing the most demand for services like what RJ&A provides and beyond?
It's in that hyper growth space and in that SMB and mid market, kind of that 50 to 300 to $500 million. Because to Sean's point, they've got the funding now. They've got the demand that's out there. They certainly have the market, but what they don't have is either the experience to get it done and or the validation of how to do it. So when you step back and really look at this from an enablement perspective, you look at it from we always talk about ICP, right? The ideal customer or client profile. Let's take a step back and look at it from the perspective of IEP, and that's the ideal employee profile, where you guys come into it. Now, you've got the talent assessment in place, you've got the talent acquisition in place. What do you do with them next? Well, the logical piece is that we step in and help out on the onboarding piece. But, enablement, it's a marathon. It is definitely not a sprint. And what I'm seeing in those smaller companies are looking for the onboarding piece, but they're really looking for strategic consulting. We've got all these disparate pieces that are out there, but how do we get our arms around it and turn it into a program that looks like this? Talent acquisition that now leads to onboarding, into business acumen, i.e., how do I do my job role specific, into the reinforcement and the coaching piece, which is a critical piece that tends to get left out. And then from there, how do we ensure that we're putting in place revenue generating metrics? And the last piece, which is succession planning. We've got these folks in place. What do we do with them? How do we then migrate them to becoming true coaches and leaders and not just managers?
Right. Okay. So this is all great. And I know that companies are trying, right? They're really trying hard to be able to accomplish what others are being able to do and to see, results. So it's not that it's for a lack of effort. There's clearly other issues that are at stake here, right? And so what are the issues that you guys are seeing? Why is it so challenging for companies, large and small, to be able to develop, plans that are effective?
Sean, do you want to take that one or you want me to step in?
Yeah. I'm just going to echo what you said a minute ago. And again, a lot of these organizations that are getting this investment or they're in this organic growth mode, first, it's a combination of resources and experience or skill set. And, a lot of the times, it's almost like I like to equate people or teams like ours, Roderick, we're almost like an AWS or an Azure. We're that virtual environment that you can just spin us up and immediately we're a force multiplier with your team. You've got you've got all of these resources to draw upon, these methodologies and frameworks and experience to help move through this point in time, because these build outs aren't permanent. They're really points in time. The other thing that I'm seeing, Andrea, many times is it's this silo effect. And usually the CEO is going to come with their vision or their strategy on moving into a new market or a new geography. And they're asking that SLT team to go ahead and develop a plan. And so the first thing that happens then is sales leadership says, I need to hire so many people, and we're going to generate so many dollars per head, and my cost per rep is going to be X. And they build their plan and their budget, and meanwhile talent is over, and they're starting to build their plan independently with some different considerations. And then, you know, for those people that are maybe more advanced than others, because many don't do this, there's a third partner in this dance, and that's product. As they're thinking about, you know, how are they going to be, or when are they going to be releasing these new products, and how is it going to roll out, and how are we going to enable that sales force? And everyone's doing it independently. And so when you don't take a holistic approach and you think about time to hire versus time to revenue. And so one of the things Roderick and I love to talk about when we were in Chicago the other week together is this whole notion of you really got to start thinking about sales enablement before you go and start to recruit and build that sales force. Like, there needs to be this holistic approach to it. It needs to be turnkey, cradle to grave.
Roderick?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you just said, Sean. And I love the word holistic, because a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, tend to think about sales as its own division away from all of the other lines of business, where we want to take a holistic approach. We want to talk to sales, product marketing, HR, sales ops, because then we can look at this from multiple lenses and understand where the soft spots are, where the gaps are, where the disconnects, and then also where the strengths are that we can then build upon as a baseline. I think there are a couple of other things. And the first starts with people. You know, we all focus on purpose and programs and performance and platforms, but at the end of the day, we're in the people business. So if you don't have the right people in place, you'll never have the right structure. Then you won't have the right compensation. And then how are you going to create leaders if you've got the wrong folks? Because in effect, what you're actually doing is creating churn, whether you realize it or not, by bringing in the wrong folks. Whether they were successful in another place doesn't guarantee they'll be successful where you are. And if you don't set them with that enablement baseline, you're guaranteeing they won't be successful. And the third is, it all starts and ends with the buyer's journey. I've seen too many times focus on sales process, sales methodology, opportunity and account planning, forecasting, and deal desk. Those are all wonderful. But if you don't focus on the buyer's journey, you won't get new buyers. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
Yeah, Andrea, I would just add one more thing. You know, it just kind of came to me when I was sitting here listening to Roderick. And when we talk about trying to really think about sales enablement early in the process, at the very beginning, when the organization or the company has said, hey, this is the strategic initiative and these are the goals and outcomes we want to get, I think that expectation setting is so important as well. Rain Group has a great survey, and I think they say that it takes 15 months for an effective salesperson to sort of move from joining an organization to achieving that top performance level. And I always like to say, you know, this whole process is a lagging indicator. And so when we think about sales enablement and ramping people to revenue, there needs to be this longer term thought process. People aren't going to come in and knock it out of the park in the first 30, 60, 90 days. And so leadership has to set appropriate expectations when they're building out these plans, and sales enablement is a big consideration of it.
Right. Okay. So what's the solution to this? Like, maybe we can help our listeners and map this out for them. You know, how can they approach this? And you know, you two, and over here, listening to many conversations that the two of you have had, you know, you love to use the term a talent or a sales supply chain. Maybe you can discuss that a little bit further for the listeners, and then we can talk about ways that they can, you know, start applying some of these findings and insights into their business, you know, today.
Yeah. Great question, Andrea. The sales supply chain is quite simply building an ecosystem around your clients to ensure that all their needs are met at the appropriate time. So let's start all the way back with the talent assessment and acquisition. Getting the right talent, then handing it off so that that talent can be enabled the correct way, and then bringing in the leaders and preparing them to coach, not just manage. And from there, you're looking at all of the other pieces that are needed, from the Opti plan and the continuing education and all of the tools and processes and programs. But it's about making sure that you surround them with that warm, fuzzy blanket, if you will, to make sure that all of the needs are met. And I'm not talking about one-stop shopping. I'm really talking about a true ecosystem that is tried and true and proven. And when they get to that point, they're ready to go, because you've already got those partners in place that they need before they even get there. It's also about creating kind of a blueprint or a roadmap to success and being able to outline that to them. This is what's going to happen. Here's how to do it. Here's how not to do it, based upon best practices, industry knowledge, and also experience from cross-functional engagements that we both had. And that's a great thing. It brings tools and templates as well, so that they're not having to recreate the wheel. So it's starting kind of that, to your point, Sean, that cradle to grave perspective of cutting it into and segmenting it into pieces, and then bringing in the right partners to ensure that it's not only executed, but adopted and then measured.
Yeah. I'd give 3 pieces of advice, Andrea, to the listeners today if they're thinking about this. First, if you're engaged in any kind of multi-hire project, have a single stakeholder that is cross-functionally responsible. Now, I'll give you an example. One of our clients recently came to us, large client, a large number of directors and reps across the West, the Central, and the Eastern coasts. And, sales had put together a business plan, based on a whole new market they were entering and a certain level of base salary compensation and OTE. And when they came to us and started working with us, because they've been looking at it with the previous lens of their traditional business, they were surprised to hear that there was misalignment there. And so that created some issues for them around the budget and the COGS they had sort of set aside for this large team they were going to build, and the anticipated revenue they would generate. And if you had that person that was sitting cross-functionally, that was able to have these conversations at the same time with talent, and maybe I would say the second point is get a partner, find someone like experts like Roderick and I that have made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. That becomes really important, so that you come out of the gates aligned, because if you're crooked by even 1 or 2 degrees on these projects, it has a significant impact. You're late in your hiring and meeting your hiring targets. You've got issues around your budgets that you've set aside and your revenue goals. And the third piece of advice I would give people, it gets back to that expectation setting. I think you need to have an escalation model, and that escalation model has to be aligned with whatever the business plan is of those revenue targets. And so when you look at an escalation model, or when I look at it, a good one is one that is A, attainable, B, measurable, and C, it's clear, it's easy to understand, it's consistent. And so we would be looking at an escalation model that says, over the next 15 months, here are the activities and behaviors and outcomes that we expect our sales force to be able to demonstrate. And you can say in week 1 or week 2, these are the things that a new hire will be engaging in. By week 3 or week 4, they'll be able to do these things. And what that does is it gives us a roadmap that allows us to gauge success, speed of ramp, and it also allows us to find where people are struggling early, so that we can have their managers and these leadership teams intervene and coach when necessary. So those are the three suggestions I would have to anyone that's getting ready to engage in one of these sales transformations.
Sean, can I add a 4th to that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
We're seeing this over and over. Not only do you need that roadmap that you talked about, and I love that you broke it down into the weeks and the months and making sure that deliverables are outlined, but I think the important part is agreeing upon those deliverables and not moving the goalposts along the way. Because I've seen times where initially things are set and we say, okay, this is the plan. We've got the deliverables. We got the week by week objectives and goals. And then we get closer and they say, oh, wait, but what about this? And now, from an American football analogy, we've moved into the red zone. Now they've pushed us back to the 50-yard line. Now we have to start all over again, or grab traction where we were already moving, stop that thing, change and shift gears, and now move back into the red zone. So once you agree upon those, make sure that in the agreeing meeting that there's flexibility and it's realistic and time-bound and measurable, as you said. But once those are locked in, know that that is the path that you're going, and it has to stay on that course. Otherwise, the definition of success shifts as you move the goalposts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that alignment early in the process. And again, I think, Andrea, one of the themes you're hearing from Roderick and I, people always come to us and say, we want to build a team. It's like saying, I want to build a house, 3,000 square feet, but I don't know what the rooms are going to be and what it's going to look like. You have to have sales enablement and ramp to revenue all starts at the very beginning, which is expectations and alignment around, what this initiative is meant to do and when it's going to happen.
Yeah, so that's that plan, build, onboard, right? Which is
absolutely
an ongoing process. So who should be involved within the organization? Roderick, you might want to start with this one. Who should be the stakeholders that are involved in planning and development and the execution?
Well, I always start with sales because I think sales is the sun, and the further you get away from the sun, the colder it gets. So they're always a central figure, and that's the goal of the initiative. But as I said earlier, you want to bring in the multiple lines of business and get a holistic view. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on some lenses and some important learnings. So when we work on an engagement, we are working with the head of sales, whether it be CRO, VP of sales, et cetera. But we want someone that sits at the top of the org chart for sales. Also on sales operations, because we're going to talk about new tools and or how tools are being utilized today, not just from a CRM perspective, but CRM, learning management, content management, et cetera, coaching tools, all those things that come into play. We also need to work with HR. And the reason there is that's where it all starts, right? And we have to make sure that the company orientation is tied to the onboarding that we're doing. We've seen too many times where you go to orientation, stop, go to sales onboarding, stop, now continuing education, stop, coaching, stop. We want to make sure that there's a continuous flow along the way. We're also working with marketing and product marketing because ultimately they are the content developers where enablement is going to be a couple of things. One, the content deliverers, but also the translators of dialects and languages. And what I mean is we don't expect sales, engineering, product marketing, et cetera, to speak sales. So our job is to go in, translate that, get it out in sales speak, also determine what's the modality or delivery vehicle, and then get the feedback, then reverse engineer that, translate it back to those other lines of business so that everyone is on the same page. So look at us as the enablement, as the conductors, if you will. You have a lot of loud notes and noises being played. You put that conductor up there with one baton, and then that piece of music turns into something absolutely beautiful. That's the role of enablement in all of this and why we have to work with all the different lines of business.
Truly holistic. Any other tools in addition to CRM, learning management, coaching tools, that sort of thing?
The things we look at are the learning management system. You want to have a centralized event calendar to make sure we don't want sales folks going 15 different places. And if they have to, they won't. Also a content management system so that information can be parsed out on a role specific basis when it's important to that given role. We want to add in reinforcement sales calls, whether it be go-to-market has shifted, competitive landscape has moved, acquisitions and mergers have happened, or you're releasing new products. The next is you want to make sure you've got coaching tools, and those tools should be tied to some form of methodology. It should be consistent. It should also have a 360-degree plan in it where you're getting feedback not only from the other lines of business, but also from the sellers that are going through this coaching experience so that they have a voice and a vote in this as well. And then finally is podcast libraries / playlists, things like, Chorus and Gong, et cetera. The reason there is you want to get as much real life experience into your new hires that are onboarding as possible. The second is we all talk about churn. People come in and they leave. When they leave, the one thing you don't want to lose is that tribal knowledge walking out of the door with them. So if you've got that recorded and you can get it out in a mobile fashion, you're already ahead of the game.
Fantastic. So we work with a lot of companies in growth mode, heavy growth mode, like you said earlier, Sean. Are there any things specific things that organizations should keep in mind when they're building out that supply chain when they're in the process of scaling, right? Massive scale up. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think that I would just sort of say that there's two themes that people should think about. First and foremost, you've got to make it part of your culture. It has to be part of your core values. And Andrea, you know this, here at Peak, one of our core values is always learning. And again, when we start to think about sales enablement, I think somebody asked a question in advance of the webinar today. Like, how do you know when you've achieved full enablement? And I think that the answer to that is you never really do. You're more efficient, you're more self-sufficient, but I think we're always learning and we're always developing on that continuum. So the first thing for an organization, they have to place value in sales enablement and the ongoing development of their staff. Because if it's not there, if it's not there from a core culture and value perspective, people will spend some money on some platforms here and there, and they'll talk to their staff about it, but it never really takes root. So that's one. The second thing that I would suggest, and Roderick hit on it earlier, you've got to have alignment. These programs, when people build a program and say, I want to hire 90 reps in 90 days, it's because they have an expectation of generating a certain level of revenue per rep in year 1, year 2, year 3. And typically, you can extrapolate that with a churn rate. And again, one of the things that are going to set the winners apart from the losers is the ability to accelerate to revenue earlier in that continuum. So it's having the right level of expectation when you come out of the gates. And finally, I would say, the idea here of just communicate. We've talked about, there's so many tools and platforms and processes, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I am a huge advocate of structure and process. But I think what it gets down to is we've just got to make this personal, and we've got to make it human. And I'll give you an example. We have so many people that call us, and they're excited about these great new jobs that we've helped them get. And we have so many companies that reciprocate that thought and say, "Wow, we're so fortunate to have attracted this person." And one of the salespeople called a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking to one of our staff, and he said, I was so nervous about going to this new job. It's almost like going to high school for the first time. You just know when you're supposed to show up. I signed an offer letter 2 weeks ago. I know where I'm supposed to go, but I don't know who I'm supposed to see when I get there. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he got a package in the mail about 5 days before he started, and it was from the company saying, and it wasn't even to him, it was to his wife and his kids saying, "Hey, welcome to the company. Now that your spouse has joined, you're part of our family too." And then they called him a day or two before his start date. His hiring manager called and said, I'm your hiring manager. You know me from the interview. I'm thrilled to have you here. Meet me here at this time. This is what we're going to do in the first day. And I think it's having personal touches and communication that, sometimes we get lost with all the platforms and tech and these big frameworks. I leave people with that.
Sean, you nailed it. It's that people part again. I love it. Yeah. I have never actually seen that happen, what you just outlined, and I would love to see more companies do that. And that is realize that there are other people involved in this hire than just the employee that you're going to see every day. They've got a whole ecosystem around them at home as well, personally, and how to pull it together. I think that piece, if you get nothing else, remember, we're in the people business. Programs, processes, tools, all of that are wonderful, and they all have their specific goal and objective there, but it's about people. And unfortunately, too many companies forget they hire a role, they hire a title, they hire a quota carrier. No, you're hiring people. And so let's step back and say, how can we make this journey not only the most profitable, but the best experience for that individual possible? And I guarantee you, the ROI on that is going to be exponential, because when people feel like they're wanted, they work harder. It's as simple as that. And when they feel valued, they go well beyond anything that's in their job description.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to jump in. We have a couple of questions here. You guys up for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So I think that this one is probably a great one for Roderick. So Brian says that he has a very dispersed sales team. Okay, his organization has a dispersed sales team, and they've found that developing an onboarding program that's effective for remote employees has been quite challenging for them. So do you have any advice for him?
Yeah, first of all, great question. And this comes up a lot because we are working in a more disparate and mobile world today. Things that I've found out are you've got to still find a way to maintain consistency and make that individual feel like they got the same experience if they're at headquarters as if I'm in Texas or California or EMEA or Latin America. And the way to do that is get your executives involved and up front and early. Have them record something and welcome these people and say, hey, we're glad you're here. This is what you're going to be doing. This is what's going to happen. And then from there, take the program that you would give them if they were on site at headquarters and turn that into a mobile experience. But here's the key. As they're going along, there are check marks. Make sure that you're reaching out and touching these people and staying in contact and connection with them, because it's too easy to get lost in the void of mobile. So reach out and say, hey, I see that you finished this. Do you have any questions? How's this working for you? How's the process going? Include them and make sure that that remote employee not only feels like they have a vote, but they have a voice in how this is working and also how it's not working. And then as you're making changes, reach back and let them know, hey, we took your advice. We're going to change the way that we do X, Y, Z, or love that you got this. Now, here's your next step in the process.
That's great. I love that. Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, I'm going to build on that, and I'm going to take it from a bit of a different lens, and it's that multi-hire lens, but it builds on what Roderick was talking about. And we were in Chicago the other week with about 400 VPs of sales from SaaS companies, and one of the guest speakers, Todd, I'm trying to remember Todd's last name.
Capone.
Mm-hmm.
Capone. Great author, so engaging, and he talks about brain-based approaches to sales. And one of the things that Todd talked about was this whole human requirement or need for us to feel relatedness. We're built to roll in packs. And so one of the things that I hear from our large clients all the time is, oh my gosh, we have got, just as you bring people to us, we want to hire them, we want to get them in the system, and we want them to start, quote, onboarding. I love the idea, if your organization has the ability to do this, set up cohorts. If you can sort of say, hey, we're going to be hiring every 2 weeks or once a month, these 5 to 10 people over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, it creates that relatedness. Like I think back to college and you think about your frosh and people you were with, and now within a mid-size or big company, you actually have people, you got a tribe that you go through life with, and you get great friendships and you feel more connected within the organization. So I suggest do cohorts whenever you can to create that virtual connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we have another question from Tom. Sean, you have led many sales teams, many sales reps in your career. How do you define when someone is officially ramped, and
Yep.
how do you identify that?
Well, again, I think that there's two thoughts here. First, my philosophy, and the philosophy we have here at Peak is always improving, right? There's always something new to learn, and you become efficient, but there's always something new to learn. So how do we define when someone's ready? It gets back to that whole escalation model, and this is where sales leadership and talent have got to get together, and they have to have this clear delineation of what are the activities and behaviors and outcomes that we expect or anticipate that a successful rep will be able to perform and achieve over a period of time. And that is, I think, the best way to do it, because then it's clear to everyone, including the rep, what the expectations are. And it gives you a great opportunity to coach, because if you don't have that, you don't know whether somebody is accelerating or behind, and you don't know when to intervene, and you don't know how. So I say have an escalation model, make sure it's measurable, achievable, time-bound, and share it with the sales organization.
Roderick, you have something you want to add to that?
Well, enablement, validation, validation, validation. It's not a single point. It's, starting early with things like in the pre-work as you're coming on board, making sure there are quizzes and assessments in there, and then putting in place accreditations or certifications, stand and deliver, that can actually show and validate that you can message back, whether it be the company pitch or whatever it is, go to market strategy, but that part has to be in there. The next piece is when you step into the onboarding process or the boot camp or whatever it may be, there should be some kind of case study in there that, again, ends in a validation point that is going to be validated and also judged, if you will, by true sales leaders and sales folks. And also there has to be a feedback loop in there. We need to know, corporate says this, let's be realistic, but this is how it really works in the real world. So get your legacy folks involved as much as possible. Then from there, it's focusing on revenue generating metrics. Ramp's a funny word because it flows and it varies depending upon each company, right? Some it's time to first quota. Some take that and then compound that with growth of pipeline. And then there are other stages that come in, accreditation scores and finalizing and finishing pre-work. But really, personally, I've always been a fan of kind of three things. One is, what's the time to first close, right? Because that really shows all the work up to that point and how quickly someone is actually absorbing it and then able to message it back. The second is increase in pipeline and forecasting. We all want 2x, 3x. How quickly can we get that individual to that, whatever the goal is, whether it's 2x or 3x, how quickly are they getting there, right? Those are two of them. And then the third is the ability to message in position. And that's where I go to that certification and that accreditation. You can be doing all the right things and saying it the wrong way and still closing deals. But if you want consistency in your messaging and positioning, the one thing you have to do is make sure there's an accreditation or a certification with the scorecard, with standardized scoring, all of those things that come into play. Then you can look back on it year over year and say, this is where we were when we first started. We've now implemented this sales enablement program. We look at the 6-month marker and then at the 1-year marker of two things and two things only. How have we decreased speed to revenue and how have we increased productivity per head?
Fantastic.
I love it.
Yeah, that's great.
And by the way, just another point, Roderick, that's really interesting. The byproduct of those certifications and awards, when we start talking about managing different generations of salespeople, particularly millennials, there's an expectation to have success and move up within the organization fairly quickly. There's I think that, effective ways to manage that particular subset of your employees also, like recognition is important. And so when you have an enablement program like this, it allows them to receive some of that recognition that's important to them. I mean, it's important to all of us, let's be real. Mm-hmm. But it also gives you a path to help them understand, when they're ready and able to be promoted into the next role too. So there's some other byproducts there from managing your team you get from that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of leaderboards and virtual stack rankings, not from the perspective of, oh, this is the top and this is the bottom. It's more of sales folks are naturally competitive. Why would we not utilize that to drive productivity, right? And to your point, generationally, the way we enable has shifted and it's owned us as enablement professionals and practitioners. Sean, there was a time where you and we would sit 30 minutes, watch, voice over PowerPoint and just click through. That's not going to happen now. No, but they will sit through 6 5-minute podcasts or playlists and probably come out more proficient than we did with our single 30-minute voice over PowerPoint or talking head. Also, We were tied to a desk at one point. Today, the world is mobile. If I give you podcasts, I give you playlists, you can take them on the plane, you can take them to the gym, you can move around. And guess what? To your point, the perpetual learning never stops, because no matter where you are, you've got those earbuds in, or you're listening to a podcast, and you're always gaining knowledge. The key is, how do we take that knowledge they've gained and validate it on the backside to make sure that not only did they quote unquote get it, but they're now able to go and message and position it as well.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes. It's something along the lines of, what if we invest in their development and they leave us? And the response is, well, what if we don't and they stay?
That's why I always say, we train animals, we enable people.
Yeah, that's right. I love that one.
I think that's the perfect place to end. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for your time here today. I hope that we've been able to provide some good value to the folks at home that are listening or in their offices. And I mean, absolutely, we will be sending out an email to everyone that registered with our contact information. So if you do have any more specific questions that pertain to your specific business, we would all be more than happy to jump on a call and have a conversation with you guys and see whether or not we can help in some way, or at least put you in touch with the people that can. So as a reminder, I will be sending a recording out to everyone as a thank you for participating, and also a copy of Peak's 2019 compensation study, which is sure to be a quite enlightening piece of content. So that is going to be ready by the end of this month, and you will all be receiving a copy for you to review and share with your team and anyone else who who wants to gain some insight on compensation, which is always a hot topic from the clients that we work with, of course. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks so much for joining, and we look forward to doing this again. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Roderick.
Sean, Andrea, thanks. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Take care, Roderick.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.